Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about conflict management and two case studies in Argentina and Brazil. But first off, we were just wanting to get a show of hands. How many people here have experienced some kind of conflict, whether it's interpersonal or in organizations or with communities in their work in tropical conservation development? So for our millions of YouTube viewers, just about everybody in the room put their hand up. So it's a very common thing to encounter. So would anybody actually like to share an example of one of those conflicts? Just briefly, maybe what the conflict was about.
My girlfriend doesn't like the way I dress.
Serious one. Anybody else?
When WWF got the Brazilian government to commit to protecting 10% of the Amazon, a lot of NGOs criticized that for not being socially inclusive.
Okay. Great. So we'll explore a couple cases of conflict and.
So hi everyone, my name is Jon Dain. I think I know all of you. So I wanted to also note that there are two other names on here, Sonia Cannavelli and Denise Mello, who are both alumni, TCD alumni, and I'm going to talk about why they're up there a little bit later on. So today we're going to go over first briefly why focus on conflict management, although I think Natalie may have just made that point nicely. Then we're going to get to two stories of the type of conflicts that I think many of you will be familiar with, Then talk about two capacity building courses which were designed to address those issues and why it was capacity building, and then some impact evaluation we did. Oops. So conflict. You all had your hands up, or most of you had your hands up a couple of minutes ago when Natalie asked. And conflict over natural resources is just going to keep increasing. Our current world population is 7.5 billion, as you know, give or take a few hundred million. By 2030, 8.5 billion. By 2100, 11.2 billion people. Okay, and as we all know, as TCD kinds of people, resource use associated with that kind of population pressure is really going to stress biological systems. But you'll notice the "and" here. And something we don't think about as often, at least when we're talking about conservation kinds of issues, is it also intensifies pressures on social relationships. And greater numbers of people are going to be negotiating the resource that they depend on or that they want, depending on who they are and where they're coming from. Okay? So you notice the word negotiation. And this past summer, the first draft of this presentation was given at the Association for Tropical Biology and Conservation Conference in France. And at that conference, their theme was that in a rapidly changing world where untouched ecosystems are vanishing and biodiversity will have to be maintained in human-modified and sometimes novel environments, reconciling conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is a critical issue. And I would go beyond it's a critical issue. I mean, it's just what has to happen, right? And, you know, that reconciling is negotiation. That's really what this is all about. Differing interests trying to work this out without killing each other or destroying the resources. So we're going to have two case studies here, and I'm going to turn it over to Mao, who's going to lead us to the first one.
Yeah, thanks, John. So today we're going to focus on two examples. One has to do with birds versus crops that take place in Argentina. Talk about kind of detail. The other one has to do with sort of illegal versus legal logging that takes place in Africa. So the one in Entre Rios, that's a very classic biodiversity conservation versus agriculture problems, how sometimes it's injured. Now, for those of you who have never been to Entre Rios is this little province, and the matrix of that province is composed of of these type of landscapes have some small patches of forest and very intense fabric. And one of the main crops that they have there is the soybeans, but also sunflower. So this is a great opportunity for birds to eat seeds. Just go out there and just eat a whole bunch of seeds. Like the monk parakeet. And what happened with the monk parakeet is actually quite interesting because, so the story of this conflict started around the 1960s. And when the agricultural expansion started to be a big thing in Argentina. And it turns out that once the farmers opened up new land, they also established small patches of eucalyptus trees because they thought, it's a nice tree. Now it turns out that the people who did agriculture were not alone in thinking that these trees look good. The parents really like nesting these trees, and so every time the agricultural frontier expanded, these guys expanded. And when up till now, the area that expanded is comparable to Great Britain and Costa Rica together. I mean, that's a lot of space. And so imagine this extension of land being almost dominated by these birds that fly over into your fields. Imagine that you own these fields, right? So they go into these fields and just eat all these seeds. But the monk parakeets are not alone. Also, the doves they had their moment. And you can see how the doves also took advantage of some pretty interesting structures. And so these birds, they just nest. So make it, just to say a comparison, not very demanding. Okay, so they can nest in flower pots, on the as well in the fields. So these birds also took advantage of this large agricultural expansion. But with the expansion, there was also some opportunities, and turns out that these doves are very popular in the hunting. And there are individuals who pay around $2,000 to $3,000 to just go there and shoot unlimited quantities of birds. And I was talking to someone who likes to hunt, and I'm from Argentina, and I see birds all over there. Doves all over Argentina. I just couldn't understand why would it be attractive on doves. But they were saying that because of how it flies, it's just really, really interesting and attractive to hunters. And so they really like it. But, once this started happening, this started creating some problems. And so the farmers started applying some lethal management strategies to control birds. Now remember, we're talking about lots and lots of land where lots and lots of birds want to farm. Okay. Now it turned out that most of the damage that occurred was not, so there was a big component in the perception of damage more than the actual damage. Some research showed that most of the fields actually had somewhere between 10 to 20% of damage. So it's not like these birds were destroying absolutely everything that ranchers produce. So there was a lot of perception, right, as the source of this problem. Now, INTA's idea of fixing this problem, just to let you know, INTA, the Instituto Nacional de Tecnología Agropecuaria, would be somewhat like the USDA equivalent. It's a group dominated by agronomists, and their idea of fixing the problem was just saying, okay, well, we did the science, now we know, so let's have our extension we'll just go and communicate this. Boom, problem solved, right? And so they went to the fields and they told the landowners, you know, this is not a real problem. It's about perception. Now, now, even if there's data showing that there's a lot of perception driving this problem, in the minds of these landowners who invest all their time, that problem is super real. So how would you guys feel if I were to tell you, you know, classes are not that hard? You know, matter of perception, you know, it's not a big deal. So that's what happened. So these guys started to get really, really frustrated at INTA. So were they really fixing the problem? And it was at that point where this agency started realizing, well, maybe some tools to address this. And so just to make a long story short, there was a whole lot of desperation and anger and some poison birds and, you know, killed birds. But and this was a problem not only because they killed birds, but also because by poisoning birds, they were also killing some non-targets. And also when they were hunting them, it wasn't just that they kill a whole bunch of doves, but then the ammunitions that they used for lead also contaminated. Okay, so there were a lot of unintended consequences of this program. And so, like I mentioned, the main actors of the story were the birds and the fields, which ended up having all the birds eating some of it, but it wasn't, you know, there was a lot of component of that problem that was a perception. And so, you know, there was a lot of desperation and anger and poison birds, just to sum everything into one slide. And so at that point, it was the moment where one of our colleagues and TCD alum, Sonia Canavelli, called John. With that.
And now we are moving to Acre. So we are going to the western Brazilian Amazon, to the Chico Mendes Extractive Reserve. The extractive reserve was created in 1990 after a couple of decades of massive deforestation occurring across the Amazon and into areas that were occupied by traditional rubber tappers, so people that collected latex from for over a century. So this clash of land use interests transpired into the rubber tapper social movement, which occurred during the 1980s, and in 1990 the reserve was kind of a product of that conflict. So in these reserves, let's see, the reserves are sustainable use protected areas, and they're co-managed by the local residents who live within them, as well as the Chico Mendes Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, which I may refer to as you. And so these reserves are owned by the government, but the residents have local user rights. So what do those rules entail? Residents can extract non-timber forest products such as Brazil nuts or latex, which is turned into rubber, for commercial use. They are allowed to harvest timber, but mostly for, or only for use within the reserve. So they can construct houses, structures, things that would. People are allowed to clear up to 10% of their land holding. Each land holding is at least 200 hectares, so it's very big. But they can clear for pasture or agriculture to support kind of subsistence lifestyles. What rules can they not do, or what are the rules against? So they're not allowed to harvest timber for use outside of the reserve. So for example, if people have a house in the local or nearby city, they can't use the timber from the reserve to construct that house there. And similarly, they can't use or harvest timber for commercial purposes unless it's approved in a management plan, but that proved to be a very bureaucratic process. So until now, until 2014, timber was not legally allowed to be harvested from these reserves. So while the reserve was created to support traditional rubber tapper livelihood, in 1990, rubber subsidy that was critical in supporting the rubber tapping activities, like latex and produced rubber, kind of pulled the rug from under the rubber tappers' feet. And so all of a sudden, rubber tappers were forced to further diversify their land use, their livelihoods, and turn more to cattle ranching and agriculture in order to support themselves. Actually, that kind of shift in land use and sort of livelihood practice resulted or contributed to increase in deforestation, especially where access was greater, as well as illegal logging, increase in illegal logging. So what to do about this? There was a logging project that was initiated in 2013, for the development of it, and then in 2014 was actually one part of extractive reserve. The logging project was government incentivized. A local logging cooperative was in charge of operations and project development, and residents of the reserve would simply sell their standing logs to this cooperative to log and sell. So on the surface, it looks like it could be sort of a win-win situation because on the one hand, ECM Review has kind of a third party helping to monitor forests because they have these inventories. There's more people watching, kind of, eyes on the reserve. And the residents have another source of income, and in many cases, more points of access. So roads were developed for the logging project that also served as access to get in and out of their forest. But of course, it's more complicated than that. There's one story that I think kind of helps to illustrate and characterize some of these conflicts. There was one reserve resident that was participating in the logging project that needed a cedar tree to construct a house for his son. So what did he do? He harvested one of the cedars that happened to be in the inventory forest plot. And ECM Review caught wind of this and came to his land holdings, gave him a very hefty fine of 2,000 reais, so at this time it was about $700. They had an explosive argument because the residents thought it was unfair, and both parties left the situation with very bitter taste in the mouth. Because from the residents' perspective, this is totally unfair. I have the right to harvest timber for a house and my land. I'm not breaking any rules. And these rules from the logging project were never well explained, and they're not fair anyway because I should have this right. And also, it's a huge fine for a small infraction, whereas people are taking logs out by the truckful on a weekly basis at least, if not more. So, there's a huge problem happening, and targeting me, charging me their fine. On the other hand, ECM Review is trying to enforce rules that they can, and in this case, they have very few people on the ground able to, so human resources are minimal, if not even sufficient, and financial resources similarly are. And for the monitoring and sanctioning and management of an area about 1 million is very large, so it's very big. We have unphysical staff. So, but that's not all. It's also, in addition to being the complex relationship between these two parties, it's also very emotional. So actually on the 4th day of the conflict management workshop, oddly enough, we had an ECM Review representative in the workshop with us, but he was interrupted by a phone call because somebody, a professor from the local university, had borrowed his truck, take students out on a field trip to go take measurements outside of the extractive reserve. And when they got back from the forest, their truck had 4 slashed tires because they didn't know that, the professor was borrowing the car, but just the sight of the ECMHQ's logo and the assumption that they were there doing sort of business inspired them to slash tires. So the conflict is very charged, and these tensions are very severe. So again, just looking at the recap of the story, you have rubber tappers in the reserve doing extractive activities, but because of some policy changes, livelihoods evolved and have been evolving over time. This logging project has kind of been introduced to sort of alleviate some of these conflicts and problems with resource management, but it's led to a bit of frustration between residents and the governing agency, and resulting sort of heavily charged conflicts. So just looking at the 2 case studies, we see that they have a lot in common. We have 2 conflicts, the birds versus crops, and then the issue of timber rights and illegal versus legal logging that maybe seems sort of in the realm of natural science or something that a forest engineer or biologist could attempt to tackle. But as we can see, the underlying issues in both of these conflicts, so transparency of decision-making, governance, issues of relationships, trust, are much more kind of in the realm of social science and learning how to deal with interpersonal relationships, issues of trust, issues of fairness, and if you don't have those skills or know how to manage those situations, it might undermine these land use scenarios. So what are the skills and knowledge that are needed to address these issues?
So, like all of these types of conflicts, it's not as simple as we just presented. There are all sorts of relationships, there are all sorts of histories there are all sorts of complex things. The context is pretty complicated. And the big issue is not that, wow, how interesting, we can analyze this and figure out that there are relationships, but that these issues are impeding the goals of the projects, right? In Argentina, the economy is based very largely on agricultural production. Argentina is a very efficient and top level producer of all sorts of grains. This stuff is being impacted, and INTA has people who are charged with trying to keep the balance of maintaining biodiversity or conservation while supporting agriculture. They can't do that if there's no trust, there's no communication, and they can't work with the farmers, right? And similarly, in Brazil, as Natalie said, okay, we're trying to help provide people an income while they keep something that we're thinking of as conservation area, extractive reserve going, okay? So those goals are being impeded by these conflicts, and we see them everywhere, as you talked about. So the issue is, of course, is now that we're hinting at that dealing with these kinds of issues, it seems like common sense, but it's not. There's a specific set of concepts, skills, and strategies that are associated with it. And outside of places like TCD, very few people get exposed to these kinds of things. Okay, so let's go to 2 of our alums, Sonia Canabelli and Ricardo Melo, who are both, she works with INTA. She's coordinator of a large conservation biology program working particularly with birds, and Ricardo is a program manager for World Wildlife Fund Brazil. So they're the ones that are in charge of each of the 2 case studies in a sense that we're talking about. And these are quotes from both of them that I just cut and pasted because I think it captures some of their frustration and why they contacted us. So one of the main difficulties we face is that we biologists are not prepared to deal with people and human dimensions of management, yet professionals from other areas like sociologists and anthropologists, et cetera, aren't familiar with natural resources and biodiversity management. So how do we address these issues when we don't have people who can deal with these? And similarly, Ricardo talking about the people that he works with as technical staff. Lots of people come to the Amazon to work in conservation without the tools to look at things critically and practically. They've had good academic training, but no practical training. It just, at our universities, you don't get this kind of stuff. So they called us and asked if we could help out, and not because training in conflict management is the answer to all our conservation problems, but it is one important little tiny piece that can help contribute, because as we, I think, know, most of the challenge we face has to do with humans, communication problems, who gets to make the decision, who has the power, all those kinds of things that you learn in your classes. So the idea was, okay, can we just come and do a conflict management course? Yes, but we want to think about how things work in TCD and what we know from experience to be effective. So we took a collaborative TCD approach. So we have TCD alumni and partner organizations who contacted us. We have graduate students who have experience and or from the countries and places where these things are occurring. And we have TCD faculty who are interested in these places and can help all three groups bring different levels of expertise, having contact with this from different levels. Okay? So all of that equals, for those who've ever read the TCD paper, this is the framework, right? So take a look at this. So think of this portion over here. Okay? Yes, there's some of that stuff involved, but this is really about and I'm not dissing that. I'm just saying this is where we're focused, right? This is using the network. These are partners. These are alums. This is application in the field for both parties. This is skills for students, for faculty, et cetera. And this is providing experiences for students who can then take that farther. Okay? So the TCD framework, praxis partnerships. And you can see here that mix of alums, students, and faculty, and out in the field, which is what we're trying to do. And of course, it's really easy. So what we did is capacity building, right? We developed some courses specifically for people, and very briefly, we're going to go through some of this. So there was a course in Entre Rios, and it was nice and cool out, which is wonderful, and that was in 2014. There was another course in Chapuri, that was in, you can't see it, but in 2015. And for those of you who've gone to TCD gatherings and such, you'll recognize that we don't let people sit in their chairs. So part of the TCD approach also is not just let's get students and faculty and alums together, I'm sorry, I'm probably standing in front of you, but also to think about that idea of diversity. So instead of just training people who are within INTA, getting a lot of different stakeholders involved so that they are talking to each other as well. So we had researchers, extension, people from the regional and national offices, so a lot of people from INTA, but from all over the place. People who don't interact with each other, some nonprofits, people from academia, some students and local government officials. Similarly, in Chapuri, there was a slightly smaller group, but national NGOs from these two states, local NGOs, people from the university, from the federal government, state government, and some community leaders, all working together on these issues. So these are both 5-day courses, and they have similar kinds of approaches, starting with understanding what conflict is, what some of the causes are, and how can you analyze it. Then, then a lot of tools and skill building, practicing stuff, not just talking about it, but trying to do it. Then going out, live case studies, interviewing people, talking to people and hearing from people who are on different sides of the issue. So that talk to somebody who thinks that this is why we're trying to enforce these logging rules. And this is why it really pisses us off that somebody was fined. This is why we're trying to, over time, adaptively manage these birds that are attacking crops. Well, this is why that's not acceptable to us as farmers, right? And then, of course, going through all of this, applying it to case studies, then going back and thinking about, okay, so what are the issues that you're addressing in your work? What are the issues that are really key to you, and how can we apply these things to that? Okay? And this is kind of, don't worry about this, it's kind of a lousy slide, but for those who are interested, the content of what we do in this has to do with, you know, how do you understand what a stakeholder is? How do you think about negotiation? What is it that people, what motivates people? What are the roots of conflicts, generally speaking? How can you organize and analyze that kind of data? And then what kinds of skills do you need to use to take those conceptual things and actually interact with people? How do you go out and effectively try to collaboratively problem solve. And the list on the right is the part that I really wanted to focus on. So I mentioned that idea of having diverse participants from different places and different perspectives, and trying to giving them spaces to share their knowledge and their opinions and how they see the world. And then very experiential, lots of group work, lots of building trust, lots of focus on local cases and dialogue. The idea being that within the courses and the way that we teach them, trying to model approaches that one can use in the field in your real work, so that you're doing in that classroom out in the field what you should be doing in your jobs and your working. Okay? And the question, of course, is, did any of this actually help? And last year, I was going to present at a conference that I mentioned earlier, and we said, well, why don't we go and see if we can check back in with people and see what kind of impact this had. You know, it's nice to put up slides and say this is wonderful, and yeah, they're listening, so now all the problems are solved, but what's going to happen? So right after these courses, we did, I'll just sort of call it lame evaluation. So in Argentina, we did filmed interviews, which we're going to come back to in just a second. And then in Brazil, we did some questionnaires and group discussion. And I'm going to pause briefly because I saved the wrong version that didn't have the video link, but we're going to play a very brief 2-minute evaluation that Mauricio put together. So in the meantime, how many of you have had training in conflict management, communication, stuff like that? Raise your hand if you've had. It doesn't have to be a formal course. It could be some sort of workshop or something like that. Okay, so what kinds of, if it wasn't, did anybody not at UF? Let me ask that. Anybody have something not at UF? So what were the kinds of things that you were exposed to that?
There was but I can remember one, diplomacy process.
Okay.
That one was more like in the relation between different actors, like at the macro level, and how language and the management of your own interest can be considered in terms that the other can is to you and vice versa.
And why were you in that training, just very quickly? Did somebody send you there, or was that something you're interested in? Just
So
briefly.
it was something, a program between Bahrain University and and they were doing that together. There was an inter-school school with 25 people, not very large.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I'm going to play this. So Mauricio, when our course was done, sat down with everybody in the course and outside and filmed them and asked them questions about it. And then he put together this video, something I could never possibly do. It's very kind of important.
Yo en algún momento iba a no tomar el curso, pero lo terminé tomando y me alegro de haber escogido por esa alternativa, digamos. Tengo que ser sincero y decir que la negociación con personas no es lo que más me gusta. Yo soy bastante biólogo, me siento más cómodo tratando con los animales que con las personas, pero me ha sorprendido gratamente el curso.
Algo que me quedó muy claro y que me relajó un poco es que los conflictos no tienen solución, sino que se gestionan y se manejan, cosas que por ahí en lo diario a nosotros nos generan mucha ansiedad.
Ni hablar en la salida de campo, el tema de escuchar, o sea, la importancia que es cuando yo quiero saber los intereses y posiciones del otro, cómo acercarme para lograr eso.
Sumamente satisfecha y además de ser compartido, porque lo estuve también chequeando con otras personas que tomaron el curso, también permanentemente, no solo investigadores, sino también agentes de extensión, que era un poco mi temor. O sea, mi temor era por no estar a partir de las disciplinas más sociales, estar más en un área más dura dentro de INTA, decir, estamos ofreciendo algo que ya se sabe o que ya se conoce, y entonces ese era mi temor fuerte, con la parte de involucrar a extensión, y entonces fue muy bueno poder ver que incluso para las personas que permanentemente están haciendo reuniones o que están convocando gente o que están interactuando con la gente también, el curso les fue de utilidad.
El tema de cómo manejar las ansiedades de todos nosotros para ir un poco más despacio, que me parece que es una de los puntos claves. Yo creo que vamos a tener el llamado de la conciencia que nos va a estar diciendo, uy, cuidado, o no, más despacio. O sea, ahora el curso va a ser la voz de la conciencia nuestra.
Claro. So, I should have played that one. Yeah, okay. That's always exciting when you do something to hear that kind of feedback. And for example, the woman in the pink jacket at the end is a national conservation leader in Argentina. But what most of us know, and if you do this kind of thing, is that when you have a course and it's good and the food is good and people enjoy it, if you ask people right afterwards how it was, like, it was great. This was transformational. I mean, my life is different, right? And it's not that that's not necessarily true, but you know, there's the emotion and the elation of being with a lot of really cool people and, you know, having a very exciting and very stimulating experience. So yeah, sorry. Thank you. So we decided to follow up. And this was, in the case of Argentina, 2 years later, there really had been no contact with people. And in the case of Brazil, 1 year later. And I'm going to start with the disclaimers, is that no journal is going to accept this stuff. So we had a decent response rate, but not that great. This is self-reporting. We were not doing, you know, brain scans and seeing how people changed. The World Wildlife Survey was not anonymous. The one in Argentina was. The people in the course, we couldn't just send some survey to. Denise Melo, when I went and interviewed people, right? The pre-test press was not comparable with the post-test that we did because we really wanted to explore and find out what people got out of it. And of course, this is 2 years post versus 1 year post. So anyway, so there are a lot of questions that we asked, and we just took a few of them that were very striking to me. And I want to start, before I get this, with a story. So we used for SurveyMonkey, excuse me, and I put all together. We haven't seen these people in 2 years. It was a 1 week course. They don't live together. They're not sitting there going out and having beers and talking about this course. So it was kind of scary to ask them what they thought. And I wasn't sure we were going to get any kind of response. And we were actually, Karen and I were sitting in a hotel room in Germany, and I finished it and I hit send and sent it out to everybody. And I thought, okay, well, hopefully in a month we'll get some people. And 10 minutes later, I saw bing, there's a response. And within an hour later, there were 3 more responses. And in those responses I went, not only had people answered the questions, but one said, wow, it's so weird, just wrote to me. I was just trying to find our Dropbox site because I was looking for materials. I'm facing this kind of conflict now, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And that was the experience in both cases, not necessarily because the courses and the efforts were transformational and fantastic, but because there's such a felt need for this people are facing it every day. So anyway, things that they applied, it was kind of interesting to see similar kinds of things. What was really generative to people was, wow, listening in new different ways, identifying interests that people have, not just their opinions, and how to hear from all sides, how to design a meeting. We asked them, okay, when you do confront a conflict now, what kinds of things do you try to do? What are 3 things that come to mind first? Well, first, who are the stakeholders? I hadn't really thought about that in a broad sense before. Again, what are the causes of these kinds of things? And then in one case, people talked about listening, which was clearly a big issue for them, and others, possible outcomes. How confident are you as compared to before? And a lot of people said they were very confident. And how useful was it in terms of achieving the goals of your organization, not just for you? And we also got strong responses overall with lots of comments about this stuff. And this is one of those things that nobody except me is going to read or us going to read. But I want to point out that some of the things that people really highlighted, that idea of understanding the viewpoints of others. You know, that's a really difficult thing to do, and helping people think about that really was the ability to differentiate between what people are saying they want and why they really want it. And down here, I highlighted a couple of things that were very different in the 2 courses in terms of results. How to address challenging behaviors, you know, people that you find difficult to deal with, and how do I interact with people who I really don't like or disagree with. And there was a very different, I don't really know why, but very different results there. Anyway, so we're really surprised and pleased by this. And we also asked people about follow-up. And everybody wanted follow-up. As I said, that idea was just stunned how many people replied and how quickly. I didn't even think they'd know who we were when I wrote them. And then among that, some people wanted more training and some people wanted backstopping. Training is great, but I wish there was somebody here who could help guide me through some of these processes, because every conflict is different. There are case studies and things like that. And then in Brazil, there was a lot about meetings, which is kind of interesting, and how do I identify those invisible stakeholders that we don't often think about. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mal and Natalie, but we wanted to end with some of our reflections as a training team. And I have to say what a pleasure it was to work with the guys. We have some really talented students and alums in this world. So anyway.
So I'll talk about 2 takeaways for me in this experience. One was just the awesome experience of gaining a perspective of what these sorts of classes and workshops look like from the other side, so not the participant side, but the playing side, and just witnessing Jon Dain behind the scenes, constantly sort of monitoring the interactions and how people are learning, just the sort of process involved over the course of 5 days, because my experience has been, you know, maybe 1 day, but in this situation, there are people developing relationships, sharing their experiences, you know, in really difficult jobs in the field, facing conflicts, on a regular basis. So watching those interactions, learning about that. And then also kind of, I guess, I just was struck by the idea that, you know, these TCD skills that we, you know, develop in the certificate program aren't just for us to become better researchers or facilitators in the field, but they're actually a set of skills that are very valuable and that we can share with other people in the field as well. So through some sort of workshop like this, you can spread those TCD sort of skills and have that multiplier effect. It's something that I never thought about before, but certainly very valuable.
Yeah, and just building on what Natalie said, it's not just a multiplicative effect. I think it's also the fact that the skills that you see in those courses, they're not random. They're not just because there's an actual or skills, and it's not because I'm saying it, because they picked up the phone, but hey, Natalie, Don, you need help. So I think that's super important. And then on a more personal level, I don't know, another possibility of conducting or helping give a course and working at the same time that the Copa America. So to be able to do both for me was, no, you know, all jokes aside, I mean, this was a great experience for me to do two things. I mean, one is strengthen the connections that I have on the ground. I mean, Jon talked about how diverse this group of people were, talking about governmental agencies, NGOs, extension, science. So that was, but then also cementing some of the knowledge that I had that I acquired through the course. I mean, I always say that he done it like the I master, but seriously, I've seen him do some serious problem solving jiu-jitsu. And I'm going to close with one small story. We were, probably remember this. So we were going to go to the field and talk with some stakeholders. And for some reason, we misunderstood what we thought they wanted and what they actually wanted, right? So, you know, there was a tense situation there. Jon grabbed that situation and turned it into a lesson about listening. And I was just completely amazed by how he turned that into learning. And so, what's that?
That's not what the reflections were supposed to be about. But so, as someone who's a faculty member, for me, there are a couple of things. I actually took that picture. This is what you see in Argentina. So we talk a lot about that model of TCD. We're trying to link up alumni, students, and faculty. We're trying to link up partners. And INTA is a government partner, and World Wildlife Fund is an NGO partner. And just seeing how incredibly well it all works, to be collaborating with people who I knew here on campus, people who were us here when they were here, who have high, powerful positions in these organizations and are really doing real conservation work, to be able to hook them up with people who are very current on what's going on in the world because they're in graduate school, who have some of these skills. It's really, the model really works. It's very impressive. And a final quick aside, for me, what was very interesting too is in both of these situations, in talking with the participants, people, as you probably know, but it's easy to forget, are so busy when they're working for nonprofits and for government organizations. And they're not getting paid much. They're just working there. And it's because they're very passionate about what they do and what they do. It also means they don't have much time to stop and reflect. It also means they don't have much time to stop and say, so Yasmin, this is what's going on. What do you think? And these courses also really serve as these platforms for people to talk to each other and reflect on their problems. And one example of that I want to share briefly is that the course in Argentina was about crops and birds, right? And one of the things that came out in the evaluation was that there's serious tension between extension and research, which is not surprising. You have the same thing here and flowered everywhere else. And that there's never been a chance for them to talk about their issues. The research is here, extension is down here, all those sorts of things. And by talking indirectly about all these kinds of relationships and power and negotiation and how to listen and all that, it really allowed them to begin a dialogue about what's going on in extension. And they found that to be a really powerful experience, very liberating for them. And it had an impact on the local organization.